So thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to pause this for a second so you can pay attention to the things I'm saying. Thank you, everybody, so much for the interest and for taking the time to join us today. What is this? My name is Daniel Hulter. I am an active duty technical sergeant, although none of what I say represents the views of any institution. They're purely out of my own brain. And I'm also the founder of this small community of practice called Agitare. And Agitare, there will be links to what that is later. We're primarily interested in getting groups to navigate complexity using some kind of thing. It might be facilitation, it might be design. It's essentially looking at the whole picture and figuring out what needs to happen next from either a product, product creation, facilitation, workshop. It's a lot of things. It's sense making, futures. Austin's been bringing a lot of that in. So that's why this is a Agitare event, because we brought a bunch of people together and we're going to have them navigate some kind of complexity together. That's how I'm shoehorning my pet project in. But besides that, what this is an ad hoc sort of hosted event from Quarantine University where somebody asked the question. I think it was Gerald asked the question, how do other people overcome bureaucracy? And I was like, rather than answer that, why don't we create a space where other people try and answer that, right? Where we just do some things together and see if we can create some collective and useful answers to that question of how we might overcome bureaucracy. So that's what this event is about. It's about trying to overcome bureaucracy, specifically in the US Air Force, because it's a Quarantine University thing, and all of the hosts of this happen to be in the Air Force. But I'd imagine that people from outside of the Air Force might have opinions on, navigating, overcoming bureaucracy based on their experience. And we might have some lessons for them as well. So making it a porous and open kind of opportunity for that exchange to happen just makes a ton of sense. Like, why would we silo ourselves to try and answer that question? One thing I do want to tell everybody is that this is a recorded event. It is being recorded so that other people can get benefit from it later if they wanted to. And so just be mindful of that. Please do take notes on your own. If things strike you as particularly interesting, it's good to have artifacts later. Like, just that being in your heads isn't necessarily, like, that's great. That would be a solid value to produce out of this event, that we put something useful into your head. But if you then can reflect that back to your community or to the participants of this event, then we can create something really useful and we can kind of create chains of logic moving forward, right? So I just want to encourage you to create artifacts as well. If you are interested in helping me to create artifacts on a Miro board, there's a Miro board for this event. I've put a link there. If you've never used Miro before, or you hate Miro like Austin does, or you would find that overwhelming, then don't use Miro. Don't try and do it on your mobile. It's going to distract you. You're going to miss out on the value. So this is a real weighing cost versus benefits kind of thing. But there's a space below. There's a note-taking area, but feel free to mess up my board. It's really there to be messed up. All right, what else do I have to say? Nothing said here represents the DoD or the Air Force. This is just a bunch of people who happen to be in the Air Force who are talking about these subjects, right? So just be aware of that fact. I'm gonna, before I get to rules, I'm gonna let other people introduce themselves, starting, and this is the hosts, starting with Stephanie.
Hey everybody, my name is Stephanie Pileggi. I am a first sergeant with the 433rd Aeromedical Evacuation Squadron down at Joint Base San Antonio, Lackland. I'm a traditional reservist. Been in the Air Force for 18 years, several duty stations, both active duty as well as the reserve. And I think between myself, Gerald, and Daniel, we kind of started asking those questions, and then Daniel, doing what he does, invited us to this awesome event and kind of picked our brains to help put it together. So I'm excited to talk to y'all today, and thanks for joining us.
Fantastic. And I was also excited to hear that Stephanie is also a sociology nerd, has a degree in sociology, which is something that I'm pursuing. And so she's going to kick it off here with one of the first talks, which is going to talk about bureaucracy from a sociological perspective, which I think is going to be really interesting and useful information for participants. So next, let's go to Austin.
Hey, how you doing, everybody? I'm Staff Sergeant Austin Wiggins. I am a experienced designer and collaborative futurist at Air Force CyberWorks. I help design experiences between products, services, and other sort of ephemeral processes, those types of things. And then I like to get people together to come up with better ideas for the future. I look forward to talking to you all today about how we might be able to go forward on a better future for bureaucracy. Nice to meet you all.
All right, excellent. And Gerald.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Always do a mic check. I'm Gerald Castillo. I'm in the Air Force, obviously a tech sergeant, 12 years in right now. Used to be a C-130 crew chief, and I do air traffic control in Joint Task Force Bravo and down in Honduras. And honestly, Daniel inspired me, with these quotes from the Air and Space Cyber Symposium. And I'm like, you know what? Enough of this talking stuff. Like, let's do some actionable stuff. And so I'm here to gain experience from everybody here and then just share with my community so we can accelerate change forward. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm excited about this because I'm a big believer in ad hoc, just kind of conflagrations of people to do things together, whether or not that results in something like an institutional form where we like create a new tribe and we call it a name. That doesn't actually necessarily matter. If you can bring people together for events where they bring all of their energy to like create something great and beautiful or useful, that also is one of the ways that we move society forward. It's not necessarily just the institutional form. If you want more of that, look at my YouTube video on TIMN, but I won't go too much into that. All right, I should talk about rules. The rules here are fairly strict, but there aren't a lot of them. The first one, you might have seen it. I said it a bunch of times in all caps and all of the invites and stuff. You are not here to sell anything. This is one of the risks that we have when we make it kind of an open invite. People might show up and they'll be like, this is a good opportunity for me to get clients. No, it's not. If I catch you trying to get clients, I'm going to kick you out, and then I will have negative opinions of you forever. And when I see you at future events, I'll be like, oh no, it's that guy who's just in it for some kind of transactional thing for him. Let's all thanks, Bill. Let's all be a little bit, we're putting positivity out there. We're trying to create something together. This isn't a transactional thing, right? There will be benefit for you if you approach it with a little bit of altruism, right? So please don't try and sell things, your products or your organization or your services or you as a connection even, right? If those kinds of things organically come up and you're like, hey, we should actually connect later. Okay, cool. That's not you really selling, right? If you bring it up, great. If it turns into like a distraction, then we're gonna have to like deal with it. It's gonna be horrible. We're all gonna be really uncomfortable, but I'll be less uncomfortable because I'm used to this. Like I'm always uncomfortable, so I'm better at this than you. All right. If possible, please turn your video on, especially in the breakout groups. One of the things that we're going to be doing, this is a good time for me to tell you what the plan is actually. We're going to do a little impromptu networking, which means you're going to go into breakouts with a bunch of random individuals for a little while. You're going to introduce yourself and you're going to talk about bureaucracy together. This is going to be sort of trying to court serendipity, see if people have interesting stories or experiences or perspectives around serendipity. And then later, after the presentations portion, which is going to last about 35 minutes, in which you're just going to be listening to some presentations. We're going to have a whole group discussion, and then you're going to have the opportunity to say, hey, some of these things came up in the small group session, and then we're going to, we can bring those things out and talk about them together as a larger group. So it's going to go this rules, impromptu networking and breakouts, then some presentations. You can kick back and just listen to a few people talk about bureaucracy. Hopefully that is, edifying. And then we're going to have whole group discussion where it's going to be open, just conversation for as long as that lasts. And then at the end, we'll talk about sharing resources, takeaways, what's next. And then we're going to kick everybody out. So that rule, it was turn your video on if possible. The next rule is assume positive intent. Let's not have a bunch of negative interactions because we're assuming that what somebody meant was supposed to be insulting, right? Assume positive intent. Communication works better if we ask for clarification, if we're curious rather than judgmental, right? So that's going to be a rule here. If you're assuming negative intent and you're creating negativity as a result of it, that's breaking that rule. All right. Try and build on one another's ideas, trying to embrace that ambiguity. Don't waste time advocating for a position. Selling your position to somebody else here isn't going to win you anything. It's just going to lose us all the opportunity to explore more ideas, right? So if you feel like you need to win, then you're here for the wrong reasons. Make sure that ideas get heard, and then let's move on to the next idea. If you feel like more information needs to be presented and we're still yes-anding, yeah, keep adding information into that. That's fine. But you do have to cut it off at a certain point. There is no right answer. I hate to tell you this, but when you're operating in complexity, there's no such thing as a correct answer. There are better practices. There are ways forward, right? And that's what we're trying to identify. We're not trying to figure out who wins ideologically. At the end of this, there is going to be a survey. Hopefully we can gather some of the insights that you gathered from the event in that survey. This is one reason why it'll be helpful if you take notes on your own or in the Miro board there. But yeah, there's going to be a survey, and we're also going to ask you if you liked the event and if you think we should do future ones on different subjects. We've already really enjoyed the experience of planning and creating this so far. So it has come up that we might do future ones, but if you all tell us this was the worst experience ever and why are you in this business, then we'll all reconsider our choices. All right. I think that's it. Does anybody, Austin or Gerald or Stephanie, did I miss anything that you think I should have covered?
No.
All right, cool. All right, I'm going to kick it over to Stephanie, who's going to talk just a little bit, like orient us to the history and what is bureaucracy through sort of a sociological lens.
Right. So before we actually do our breakout groups and everything along those lines, and we start our conversation on bureaucracy and how we can overcome it within the Air Force, I think it's important that we all start from the same foundational framework, understanding what a bureaucracy is, its history, like Daniel mentioned, and the nature of it. So what is it? What is a bureaucracy and where did it come from? The term bureaucracy was actually coined by a French physiocrat in the mid-18th century and comes from the word okay, I don't speak French. I'm going to throw that out there right now. Oh shoot, I had it earlier. Bureaucracy, very, very close to bureaucracy. Okay, bureaucracy, excuse me. By combining bureau, which means desk, and cracy, it's a suffix denoting a kind of government. Bureaucracy can be translated to mean the rule of the desk, or the rule of office or by office. Meaning that bureaucracy is any organization, governmental or within the private sector, that is composed of multiple departments or bureaus, each with their own policy and decision-making authority. So to summarize what a bureaucracy actually is, it is a complex, multi-level administrative hierarchy with a strict division of authority through fixed jurisdictions, meaning who has power over what. And it's known for its specialization through education, certification, and recurring training, as well as what we all really kind of think about when we think of bureaucracy is the standard set of formal rules or operating procedures focused on official activities within our organization. And it's also known for its meticulous file and record keeping. Okay, so now that we know what a bureaucracy actually is, let's jump into some of the history, which turns out is almost as complex as the system itself. So even though the term bureaucracy wasn't established until the mid-18th century, bureaucratic practices date back as far as the Han Dynasty of China. Okay, and were utilized by many other ancient civilizations, such as the ancient Egyptians, Romans, Greeks. So basically, the ruling powers of these societies employed loyal officials, granting them the authority to implement various governmental policies, originally focused on taxation and land use, that later eventually progressed to establishing militaries and economies. So to add another complicated layer to the history of bureaucracy, see what I did there? It wasn't until Max Weber, a 20th century German historian, economist, and sociologist, that I said it too many times today, bureaucracy was formally studied and defined as an administrative system of government. In his 1921 book, Economy and Society, Weber argued that a bureaucracy represented the most proficient form of organization because of its rational and machine-like certainty, continuity, and unity of purpose. Now, based on the number of participants in today's conversation on overcoming bureaucracy, I'm guessing that many of us are likely to disagree with Weber's assessment. So don't worry. He also, along with what he said about it being the most proficient, he also warned that if left uncontrolled, bureaucracy could threaten individual freedom, leaving people to feel trapped by impersonal, irrational, and inflexible rules. So to fully understand the appeal of this type of organizational system, we have to kind of examine the nature of it. So ideally, bureaucracy, the principles and processes within an ideal bureaucracy are based on rational and clearly understood rules that are applied equitably to avoid undue influence by interpersonal relationships and any politics or political alliances. Okay. In addition, bureaucracies typically require personnel with specialized educational backgrounds and expertise related to their assigned departments or agencies. Along with ongoing training, this expertise helps to ensure that tasks are completed consistently and effectively. Certifications they're essentially the bureaucratic stamps of approval for each individual, okay? And training for supervisors will eventually shift from the technical expertise to actually how to navigate the organizational structure and manage subordinates. However, with the hierarchical structure of a bureaucracy combined with this specialization, it can often produce an environment ripe for manipulation and corruption that eventually leads to internal empire building, or where these experts become so adept at navigating the rules of the bureaucracy that their focus can shift to building their own power and status, ensuring their own promotions throughout a long-standing career. With increased bureaucratic power, people become deeply and personally invested into the organization. They become loyal to the bureaucracy itself. Thus, they're more likely to prioritize the mission and the needs of the organization over individual personal needs. Due to the rigid rules and procedures interwoven with institutional loyalty, bureaucracies are often slow to respond to unexpected situations or adapt to changing social conditions. Furthermore, when people feel they have no room to deviate from these set rules, they can become defensive or indifferent. Many also become overwhelmed with the amount of red tape often generated by bureaucracy. These lengthy official processes, or red tape, usually involve submitting numerous and often redundant forms and documents with very, very specific requirements. This causes productivity and efficiency to decrease, which is, opposite of what the whole point of a bureaucracy is. It slows down the organization's ability to provide their services to the public, and it also costs taxpayers money and time. Thus, The paradoxical nature of bureaucracy ensures its permanence in our society and our Air Force because we're trapped by what Weber called the iron cage of rationality. As an organization, we acknowledge and realize that the necessity of a stable and rational administrative structure, but we also acknowledge that it comes with significant limitations to human potential and innovation. And this is why we're here today for this conversation. So, Daniel, back to you.
All right, fantastic. I heard a lot of things that I already want to comment on, but I'm going to restrain myself because it's actually time to do impromptu networking. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick all of the participants here out to breakouts to have a conversation with, but probably about.
And she explained to him, yes, my hair hurts every day putting it up in a bun, like there's tension, you get the, tension headaches. And so he is a sweet soul. And he's like, well, we need to go talk to our squadron commander about this and our group commander. And he goes in and talks to them and says, hey, we need to change this. Like, women should not be in pain. And especially my wife should not be in pain. And the squadron commander says, you should probably just go talk to the group chief. So he goes, talks to the group chief, and the group chief basically rips into him and says, this is women's business. Two, there's standards for a reason, which Stephanie, you talked about, right? The bureaucracy, there's standards for a reason. And this is how we all form. And he said, yes, but they're all in pain. And so he actually said, well, I want to go meet with the wing commander. And he tried to get a meeting with the wing commander and the wing chief. And he was called insubordinate for doing that. He actually did not get a decoration out of that assignment. And so we partnered, and I said, this is crazy. Like, this is absolutely crazy. We should be able to change hair policy, right? And I just want to say it's hair, right? We're not talking about like nuclear weapons. We're not talking about anything like real hard, right? But it took 5 years to go through the bureaucracy. So I hate bureaucracy more than anybody, but I am super proud to say we cracked the code. And so I do want to share, I'll share the ending of that story, which most of you know, but I will share how we got there and how I think you could all basically repeat it, because it is not something unique that Alea Nadeem did. It is something anybody can do. It's just knowing what levers to pull. So the first time we put a package together, actually the first time Master Sergeant Lynn put a package together, the Air Force actually has a process. It's called the Uniform Board. He went through the process of the bureaucracy to submit it. It never made it anywhere. Nobody even got back to him. He submitted it through a website, never heard back. A year later, I finally reached out on his behalf and said, hey, where is this? And they said, we don't know, we can't find it. I said, okay, well, that process did not work. So what are we going to do this time? They said, okay, we'll just send it to us. And so we sent them the first draft of our recommended hair policy change. And by the way, the reason we were making these changes is to make us better. Because one, female aircrew, when you put a helmet on, did you know that like helmets aren't designed for a bun? Yes, they're not designed for a bun. So you'd actually have to take your hair out to fly your jet or be an air crew, right? When I was security forces, you had to take your hair out. So we actually were not practicing like we were fighting. And I was the first example of that when I was an A1C, but I didn't even know it. So to Stephanie's point, when she said, you become part of the bureaucracy, it's like, I didn't know. I was part of that. Two, African-American women were having higher rates of traction alopecia. And I'm going to explain what traction alopecia is. It's basically when you pull on your hair the same way. So if you put your hair in a ponytail tight every single day, it puts tension on your head. It actually creates bald spots. So we compared data, and this is why data is super important, from civilian women to military women. And military women have higher rates of traction alopecia, and then Black and African-American women were 3 times more likely to have traction alopecia. So, and then the third piece of it was, it just isn't inclusive, right? We have other countries that have been able to do this, and they are succeeding just as well. So we kind of attacked it from those three angles, and we made that argument. And the first time we tried, so we found out who the policy owners was. So if anybody knows, and you guys can put it in the chat, but it's like trick question. What is the policy for hair? 36 dash, see if anybody puts it in there. Yes, Chris, yeah, okay, Austin, yes. So 2903, right? Okay, so who owns AFI 36293? Well, headquarters A1, which is in charge of all of personnel. So we first went to headquarters A1, and they not only said no, but hell no. That this was crazy, absurd. This did not look professional. Every reason you can imagine, they said no. And then we said, okay, well, we want to exercise the system. Who is above A1? Well, it's the CSAF. And then, it's Chief Bass. So we said, we want to talk to the CSAF. This is the CSAF's decision. General Brown, who is our top enlisted leader. But before we did that, and this is why relationships are important, is we went to Chief Bass because we knew we needed Chief Bass's support, right? Because General Brown was going to look at Chief Bass. And so we briefed Chief Bass and we gave her all the facts, the details. We explained why this policy needed to be updated and why, unfortunately, we had to brief her because the bureaucracy was so strong that we could not get this through any other way. So she supported us. And then we finally got to General Brown. And then you all know, because you're wearing ponytails and braids, we can have that. And we did this so people have options. And this took 5 years. And so my point in all of this is to say that, you need to know what levers to pull. So when you're running into bureaucratic hurdles, who owns the policy? Who owns what you're trying to do? If people in the middle are telling you no, they do not have the authority to tell you no. Keep going up until you get someone with the authority to say no. So that's the code that we've cracked. If General Brown tells us no and the SecAF tells us no, we will accept that. But until those two people tell us no, we do not quit. And that's how we've been able to have some pretty big wins. I know hair policies are most popular and favorite, but we've actually done a lot more than that. We've done lactation rooms to ensure service women have a mandated place to be able to do that. We've changed some things for our enlisted air crew. And so I say all that to say is you can do this. You just have to be persistent, know who owns the policy, and work your way through that. So I feel like I've talked so much. And so I will take a pause for any questions. And then if not, I can share a few other stories if you all are interested. So I'll take a pause.
Yeah, you have a couple more minutes. You have 5 more minutes on your time block. So if there are questions for Major Nadeem, please feel free to speak up or put them in the chat.
I'm reading all the chats. I do like it.
So I will say, Major Nadeem, I joined the Women's Initiative team shortly before COVID hit, and sort of this information kind of not started to come about, but came out more publicly. And one of the other things that I found absolutely mind-blowing, even studying sociology, studying disparities in general, one of the other things that I saw that the WIT was able to accomplish was the word service member in the specific regulations and policies and legislation, specific legislation that says that we cannot discriminate based on pregnancy. And it was only, what was it, 2020 or maybe 2019 that the word 2020 that female service members officially could not be discriminated against because of pregnancy. It applied to federal civilians, but it didn't apply to us until 2020. 2020.
So what Stephanie's talking about is, so the Civil Rights Act, right, which the Civil Rights Act is a different title, right? So that is not a Title 10. I'd have to look at what the title is, but it basically doesn't apply to military. And part of the Civil Rights Act is pregnancy is in there. Up until 2020, the Air Force and Department of Defense could legally discriminate against women, and they actually were. It wasn't just like, hey, you're pregnant, you're out of the military. It was like, oh, okay, you're pregnant, you can't fly. You were essentially, your commander would dictate what you can and can't do. Women who are pregnant are not handicapped, they're pregnant. So we worked with the Department of Defense, and we included, and I was actually Colonel Jessica Ruttenberg. She went all the way to the top because people told her no, and she went to DOD. So she went to the department at the Secretary of Defense level to say, you need to include this. And so she got it in policy. So now, as of 2020, it is, I know I see Vaughn in there. He's like, 2020, yes. So it is now illegal to discriminate against service women for pregnancy. And so that's, it's unfortunate, but we did it. Jody mentioned in her questions about red teaming. And if everyone doesn't know what red teaming is, but it's basically like thinking how the enemy would think, right? Like, so what would the enemy do, right? It's a different perspective. One of the things I do is when we were doing the hair policy, I would try to go brief people who I knew did not support this, who I knew would absolutely think this was a disgrace. But I briefed them and I talked to them because I wanted to take those spears so that by the time that I got to the chief and that I got to Chief Bass, there wasn't one question I hadn't already thought of. So all those like things I didn't think of, I had the answers to. And even in the PowerPoint decision brief that I had, I put, if you're thinking this is unprofessional, let me tell you why it's not, and then wrote that out. So I can't tell you how important it is to red team your idea, and also ask people who are not thinking the same way as you do. And I know that's hard to do, but like find somebody who you absolutely like detest and get their perspective, because it will make you can do anything, right? You can survive that. So that was a huge thing that I learned, is you have to get people to give you that honest and raw feedback. I'm looking, Daniel, how much time do I have? Do I have a few more minutes?
You have about a minute and a half.
Okay, I'm trying to answer the question from Julia. It says, what's your sense of how to support people who do facilitate change in being models for those who are afraid of losing their power? That's such an excellent question. I think anytime you're willing to rock the boat or stand up, you personally put yourself in a position of retribution. So I've had folks who are on the Women's Initiative team who received retribution for some of the things that they pushed, which is very difficult in a bureaucracy. One of the things that you can support people is join them. Be that second follower to help them to not feel alone. There's so many times where I'm in a room and I say this, it seems like at one point hair policy was a crazy idea, right? But someone in the room said, actually, I think that's a good idea. And then the third person. So sometimes it's just helping your sisters and brothers out to support their ideas so they're not alone. Another tip I would say is I never walk into a meeting that I don't know where everyone stands. So if there's a decision to be made, go talk to everyone ahead of time so that you know like who holds the cards, right? So if you're going to make a decision and if you know so-and-so isn't going to support it, know before you go in. And no, because the more than likely, you never want to walk into a meeting cold. So that's another thing I've learned. I know where everyone stands before I put a decision brief out. It's a lot of work, but it has worked. Okay, I think I'm at my minute. I'm sorry if I busted time.
No, that's excellent. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. I am so pleased by all of those incredible insights. I'm going to, it looks like we have a few people dropping off. I'm going to play just a little bit of palate cleanser music between now and the next presentation, just because it's weird to go back to back to back. While I get it set up, I think that I'm actually next, but there will be an opportunity to, if Alea can stay for the group chat after the group discussion, there will be more opportunities to talk to her about it then. All right, so I'm doing a bit of a juggle here with a few things. So I have to share screen. Oh wait, no, you know what I can do? I can do fancy stuff. I'm going to spotlight myself. And then I'm going to share this thing. All right. And my talk is going to last about 5 minutes. And I'm going to talk. This is going to be a little theoretical, a little heady. If you don't know me, my name is Daniel. I like to talk in theory. This might just sound like a bunch of nonsense to you. Just if it does, just bear with us. The next talk is going to be excellent. So again, my name is Daniel Hulter. I'm an Air Force Tech Sergeant. And earlier, you heard about the history of bureaucracy, how it makes a certain kind of sense, right? It's rational. Bureaucracy is how we create standardized and efficient systems of exchange, of competition, of distribution of labor at scale. It is rational in an abstract sense when you abstract it away from the human, when you average people out and you line them up and you remove the outliers at the margins, right? So because of its rationality, it requires standardization. And if you don't happen to be a standard square peg, then forcing you into the square opening of this rational system is going to take a little flesh off. And this has been my personal experience of bureaucracy. So bureaucracy is rational in the way that machines are, and machines are rational when they're operating in a knowable environment in which all relevant factors can and have been either controlled or accounted for. Vacuum cleaners are highly rational in the context of a house, a contained system whose flooring is manufactured specifically with vacuums in mind, whose doors and walls keep that system well controlled. Vacuums stop being rational when you take them outside of the strictly controlled and contained confines of rigidly codified systems of housing. They make little sense in a forest or a desert or other natural environments where we can't account for or control all relevant factors. When rational systems make contact with complex natural ones that aren't controlled or fully accounted for, they stop seeming so rational. Rationality is conditional. Bureaucracy can be described as rational on the condition that the domain that bureaucracy is being applied to is not so complex that its rate of change outpaces the bureaucracy's capacity to adapt to that change. So take the machine of bureaucracy outside the bounds of that knowable environment, and it will make about as much sense as a Roomba in a parking lot. And let's extend this analogy to one of our favorite kinds of machines in the Air Force, aircraft. Aircraft are very much machines, and their rationality is also conditional, where the rate of change in the operation of aircraft reaches a certain threshold. That's where the machine stops and the pilot begins. At the threshold of observation, decision, and action, these machines don't cut it. John Boyd's OODA loop describes a human organic process, not a mechanical one. So bureaucracy can be described as rational, but it is not relational. Bureaucracy stops making sense when our non-standardization as humans starts to disrupt expectations, because humans aren't purely rational. Our minds, interactions, perceptions, contexts, and lives and needs are complex. We are not easily contained or controlled. We are not easily standardized, as we've already heard from many of the things that have been talked about so far. It should tell us something that roles exist at the unit level for someone whose job is essentially that human intervention, the first sergeant and the chaplain, and ideally, in my opinion, every leader whose primary purpose is to sense when the machine was taking too much flesh off of the airmen or their family. Perhaps they could be seen as pilots of those machines, where the rate of change reaches a certain threshold, that messy human threshold. That's where the machine stops and the pilot begins. At a certain threshold of rapid and dynamic observation, orientation, decision, and action, it doesn't make sense to rely on or trust the machine. We need a pilot. So throughout my Air Force career, I've been in need of intervention or accommodation of some sort almost perpetually. We had a severely disabled daughter and struggles with the exceptional family member program for the 14 years that she was alive. We've had school issues, mental health struggles, financial difficulties, isolation, medical emergencies, and then our daughter died. And we have had a lot of life that was somehow at odds with the standardized expectations of the system, a lot of messy, unknowable complexity that continues to emerge to this day, a lot of need for accommodation, for seeing us, orienting, and acting based on our needs. If bureaucracy is the machine and then somebody is the pilot, I've seen too many times when either those pilots mistook their role for simply keeper of the machine. They just let it do what it was going to do, incapable of seeing us, or they saw our situation wasn't protected in policy and felt helpless themselves. They weren't piloting the machine. They were just operators. And often I would say the machine was driving them. Or they attempted to take the stick and maneuver it, and the machine wasn't responsive to their signals. They might be in a pilot seat, but it turned out they were never pilots all along. There's a threshold at which bureaucracy is no longer rational. It is an impediment to this machine being responsive to complex, changing human conditions, like Stephanie talked about earlier. And looking at this through the simple analogy of a machine and a pilot, I have just two recommendations. These are my big recommendations for overcoming bureaucracy. The first is to change leaders. They're only going to be pilots of this machine if they feel it's their role to be, and a lot don't. This should be every leader down to the frontline supervisor. Don't reduce them to simply managers or petty bureaucrats. Give them what they need to be pilots. Give them ownership and align them to the values and practices of human-centered, dialogic, intent-driven, facilitative leadership. The second is to make that machine in turn actually responsive to the signals of those OODA looping pilots. In my view, mission command, now a part of official Air Force doctrine, should be the fly-by-wire upgrade to our organizational operating system. It really should be. Whether that actually turns out to be the case is honestly, in my opinion, up to us. Thank you very much. And I'm going to play a little music before our next speaker, if I can figure out how. I'm going to kick it over to Austin now to talk about the futures of bureaucracy.
All right, I'm going to do a quick mic check real quick. You hear me good? Perfect.
Yep, we got you.
Okay, so I'm Staff Sergeant Austin Wiggins. I am a Turkish linguist turned Korean linguist turned futurist and designer. And today I'm going to talk to you about the futures of bureaucracy in 5 minutes, so good luck for me. So we've already heard sort of the origins and definitions of bureaucracy from Stephanie. And what I really want to emphasize there is that it is not an antagonistic entity. It certainly can become one, but it is not inherently the villain that we typically see it as now. In fact, there's reasons to just suggest that bureaucracy or bureaucratic systems can help avoid some types of nepotism and, you know, some types of monarchical and ethnocentric forms of government, which is super handy. So it's not that villain that I think we see it as, although it certainly can be. And I have to make sure to hedge my words here before I get lambasted a little bit. So as we talk about the futures of bureaucracy, I want to make sure that, like, I'm not the first person to talk about a future of bureaucracy or multiple futures of bureaucracy, right? In 1970, a futurist named Alvin Toffler, a very well-known futurist, published a nice little book called Future Shock. In it, he says that because of increasing transience, novelty, diversity, that bureaucracy would essentially be enabled to maintain its shape. And that's going to be important because Daniel's already mentioned that bureaucracies make sense in context. Well, as things increase in both transience, in novelty, and diversity, the context in which bureaucracy is operated is effectively changing. So instead, he insists that adhocracy would fill that space, and that's ad hoc, and then cracy, you get the cracy ending at the end. Adhocracies are flexible. They have a specific structure to meet specific ends. Those teams are formed and disbanded as it's relevant to particular contexts or particular projects. Decisions, therefore, are devolved down to the lowest level, and coordination within these ad hoc groups relies on good communication. And this results in complex and dynamic organizational systems in structure entirely different than a bureaucracy. And I actually want to highlight there that what I've explained also explains some of the success that the WIT team has had. They are an ad hoc group that formed around a specific project and have demonstrated the ability of having that grassroots involvement around a specific project. So what I want to talk about after that is specific narratives. See, we all operate under certain narratives. And so I'm going to talk about the narratives of bureaucracy and post-bureaucratic thought for just a second. So what narratives drive bureaucratic thought? We're already familiar with them. As I say them, they'll feel like common sense to you. It's to control decisions, to have repeatable outcomes, it's to have uniformity. It's specifically the control of the few over the many. It's conformity over originality. It's job description over identity. It's a little bit of this concept of the frozen middle. It's specialism and it's certainty. What are some narratives of post-bureaucracy? So we have sort of the opposite, right? We have flexibility for sure, communication, autonomy, empowerment, and impermanence. And we could see how those narratives are already at odds just by looking at both Alvin Toffler's Future Shock and looking at bureaucracy. So we live in a world that is undeniably volatile, uncertain, complex, and highly ambiguous. And each of these factors, in fact, is increasing as change increases in that exponential way that I've mentioned already. So I can't promise you that Toffler's vision of this future, that adhocracy will come to fruition. That's not my job as a futurist to say anything is certain in the future. Besides, it's been 50 years since that book's been out, and really all we have is sort of startup culture, which is a good start, I would say, but I think a lot of startups end up falling back into some form of bureaucracy, especially as they start scaling their solutions. So what can I provide you then as a futurist, and as a futurist who can't certainly provide you a certain future? What I can do is provide you a useful narrative to start navigating this, whatever futures might come for bureaucracy. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully that works out just fine. Is everybody seeing that okay? Is that full screen?
Good.
Cool. Yep. So what you're looking at is a map of sorts. I think I just ruined it, didn't I? Okay. On the vertical axis is an axis of potential, as in how likely is it for this thing to occur. And then the horizontal axis is how far in the past or future it is to become. And so we see things along the lines of, autonomy, relevance, empowerment of bureaucrats. So the future of bureaucracy is mired in just many things that currently seem near impossible, including empowerment, autonomy, and flexibility. But I believe that they only seem impossible because our current narratives are related to the current system of bureaucracy. And it is these furthest things from the future, these most improbable things, that I want to address. And so the narrative that I present you with is empower and befriend the bureaucrat. If you are in the position to do so, empower your bureaucrats. Provide them space to break rules, especially when they're actively harming people in your organization. So if you're in a position to do so, let them break rules. Let them make decisions for themselves. Let them not be afraid to make a decision that might go against what the current rule is. And if you're not in a position to empower a bureaucrat, befriend them, because they're not the enemy. And I especially want to empower or focus on this because we run into problems, where we're trying to implement these new and innovative things, and then we run into a specific bureaucrat who is saying no, and it's very easy to make them the enemy. But what we have to remember is that it isn't them per se that is the antagonist here. It is the system that is forcing them into rigidity and is causing your process to stagnate. If there is an enemy, which I don't necessarily believe in purely antagonistic terms, it is the system rather than the individual. And besides, I think that enlisting a friend bureaucrat is a surefire way to have more flexibility, as we can see at these red lines. So as we allow for more tolerance in breaking rules, we get more flexibility in an organization. And that's essentially what those lines denote, without you having to dive super deeply into what those mean. And ultimately, what I think these narratives do is fuel something that is much more possible, even withstanding what you might see on the chart: a flexible and human-centric organization. The future is honestly almost truly unknowable, but no matter what futures bureaucracy might hold for us, or what those things might be called, whether it's adhocracy or humanocracy, or any of those many things that are coming out in terms of post-bureaucratic thought, it's undeniable that the narratives that I'm presenting here play some part of that conversation. So I want you to empower and befriend the bureaucrat, and I wish you nothing but success on your journey of navigating bureaucracy. Thank you.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Austin. And in just a moment, we're gonna have Gerald give a quick talk before we move to the group discussion portion of today's agenda. And when this music plays, I tend to talk even more and more like this. All right, Gerald, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
There, how's that look?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, looks good.
All right, go ahead. I can't go into presentation mode because it automatically does terrible things.
Okay, no worries. We will adapt, right? All right, so as you guys know, my name is Gerald, and I chose Desert Storm and the Creech connection because I like looking at the past in order to gauge how we can go into the future. And Desert Storm and General Creech basically can give us older and different perspectives in order to accelerate change forward. Slide, please. So Desert Storm, we know that in 1990, Saddam invaded Kuwait, and in 1991, a U.S. coalition force achieved its military objective when he withdrew back to Iraq. On the night of 16 January 1991, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General McPeak, wrote a thank you letter to General Creech for his years of hard work and leadership, and they knew that they were going to be successful. We knew that equipment played a vital role in Desert Storm, with A-10s providing close air support, the F-15s with air superiority, F-16s having a flexible air power, J-Stars, stealth, precision guided munitions, you name it. But after Desert Storm, General Horner, which was the air component commander, he gave a nod to General Creech, and he actually praised his organization and training. And again, Desert Storm basically showcased how the Air Force should be operating independently and also within the Joint Force as a gold standard. Slide. So General Creech was a fighter pilot during the Korean War, and he experienced an inability to operate and maintain equipment. I believe they said he had 16 pilots with like 24 aircraft with 16 crew chiefs. So that's where his frustrations came from. And this was due to a result of the defense reorganization from post-World War II, which has a lot of parallels with Desert Storm and our modern day force today. And General Creech talked about how China had faster flying aircraft. General Creech had been advocating for the capability to fight at night since the Korean War, and that finally came to fruition whenever it was like in the early mid to late 1980s when they finally were able to procure a Lantern, which is low altitude navigation and targeting for infrared at night, which is also one of the reasons that Desert Storm was successful. When General Creech took command of Tactical Air Command in 1978, one of his first priorities was equipment. And one of the questions I have at the end of this slide is, right now in the system, what are some avenues we have for airmen to envision and conceptualize equipment for the near future? Next slide, please. So during Vietnam, the Pentagon called on industry to expand on its anti-surface to air missile tactics, or its suppression of enemy air defenses. And this is where wild weaseling, the proof of concept, was validated in Nellis. So the training of wild weaseling at Nellis started saving lives thanks to men like Major Moody Suter and Captain Horner at the time. And the first red flag occurred in 1975 in Nellis Air Force Base. And Creech wanted to expand on more exercises, or more flag exercises with the different colors. And his reason for that was Creech wanted a realistic environment, realistic training to set them up for success. And he wanted to train pretty much all of the Air Force with deployment readiness, command and control, logistical readiness, and etc. So one of my questions at the end of this slide is, right now, what are some avenues within the system to allow airmen to engage directly with industry? And slide. So this slide and the next slide are the two biggest impacts I think that General Creech had with the way he shaped the bureaucracy of the Air Force, which took him quite a few years and obviously a few mentees underneath him to get that done. So when General Creech took command of TAC in 1978, the sortie rates were down for the Air Force, accident rates were up, pilots were leaving the United States Air Force at alarming rates, which has modern day parallels with that last part. Aircraft maintenance and production was down, supply logistics needed reforming. And one of the first things that General Creech did was he formed a working group of operations, maintenance, supply. He gathered all their publications that pertained to them. And he basically told them get rid of 50% of them. And what ended up happening was an increased latitude and responsibility, but the accident rates went down even though the sortie rates were going up. And he ended up decentralizing maintenance and the supply organizations. And this has hints of revitalizing squadrons, which was initiated by former CSAF General Goldfein. What was the result of revitalizing squadrons, and is that still ongoing today? And slide. So as I stated, organization and this next slide, pride, professionalism, and other human factors. General Creech was a big fan of psychology. That's why he had a lot of books in his reading program based on psychology. He always wanted to know what satisfiers and dissatisfiers his airmen had. One of the things that General Creech encountered was a integrity scandal, which happened because of forged pilot training numbers. And this came about because a pilot wrote an anonymous letter to General Creech and said, "Hey, I'm leaving the Air Force, and here's why." And this is one of the things that came up to the top. So General Creech started instilling integrity and discipline around him, airmen, wing commanders, you name it. He started making sure that they had their core values on display. He expanded the dedicated crew chief program, and basically that's where crew chiefs are able to paint their name on the sides of planes. And what this instilled was ownership and accountability. He also started measuring DUIs, depths from enlisted clubs or officer clubs. He started measuring bases that weren't mowing their lawns and etc. and he started highlighting and improving the lives of career fields with low retention rates. And he actively sought to improve their lives by reallocating his own headquarters budget for some of their projects. And that bottom line was, if you improve their quality of life, then you can improve the quality of products that they output. And my two questions for this is, does the system as a whole value integrity? How does the system measure human factors? And what is the system not measuring? And that's all I have. Thank you.
All right, wonderful. Applause. Imagine we're hearing applause. All right, I'm going to remove a spotlight. I'm going to go into gallery view, because now it's time, if I can remove the presentation mode. Oh, wow, look, my screen's really jacked up. Okay. I'm back. Okay. So now I'm sort of curious to hear from who among you is most interested in making sure that something gets voiced. You want to highlight something in particular that you wanted to dig into a little bit more, something maybe came up in the small groups. We are radically behind time, unfortunately, but that's sometimes the way that these things go. So I understand that some of you may be leaving us soon. For that reason, as I'm waiting for some of you to highlight something you'd like to voice, I'm going to share a survey link in the chat. So those of you who have to get out of here can still offer your feedback and reflections in that survey. But yeah, this is now, the floor is open for whoever would like to speak.
Daniel, not to advertise somebody else's product, but I think it's an AFWorks, their AFWorks products, Vision and Gain. If folks haven't heard about them, I can send you, Daniel, if you don't already have it, the difference between the two that was posted in Slack a little while ago. I think it's a fantastic product, and I think I've been trying to get the word out there, because for one thing, to me, it's a way to overcome bureaucracy, because anybody can go in and post an idea and a concept, and then people can team up. And I think of like the zombie hordes in what was the terrible Brad Pitt movie that was, the book was better. But
World War Z?
What's that? Yeah, World War Z.
Yeah.
But that scene in Israel where the zombie, like, they just mound up over the wall and overcome the bureaucratic wall, I guess you could say. I think Gain and Vision offer the ability to do that and overcome it and get the visibility by a stakeholder that might be able, or a higher level bureaucrat that might be able to reach and pull the idea up and say, I like this, let's do this.
So I love that idea. I love that you're sharing those two products, because I do believe that trying out different things that are intended to democratize or to create fluid networks or to increase access to information, those are absolutely parts of the picture. The thing I would add is, in addition to those tools, I think that something else is necessary, because what I didn't see there were modes of completely open interaction between people on a particular subject, because there's sort of a role-based thing going on there, which makes them like, and this is the nature of machines. Like, you have to create constraints to make them effective at doing things. You can't just make everything purely unconstrained, right? So that's why you need different products to do different things, to put it very simply, right? When things try and do all things, you end up with, if it's like, oh yeah, it's also going to solve our problem of how we don't have fluid networks, that's where I start to go, I don't know. I think that what you're talking about there are collaboration tools, but they're not open communication tools.
I also like to look at those tools as like specific probes into the specific problem. Like,
yeah,
we have no way of telling for sure whether or not Vision or Gain will actually solve the needs that they are, suggesting that they'll fix. I mean, and of course there's hope that they will. But at the end of the day, there are probes into this area that we won't know for sure that they address what they need to address until later. But the only way we will know for sure is to have people there to explore it together.
Yeah, and I'd offer that from as a comparison for like industry or the social media world. It's been all over the news the past couple of weeks, but like Facebook has Instagram as well, and then they own, who else do they own? But they have, they have that armada of apps to address all the different market and use cases, not trying to do it all. I think they tried to do it all via just Facebook years ago and realized it just wasn't going to work. So I think that's a great point.
WhatsApp. Yeah, classic. I run into this issue with communication tools all the time because I'm always trying to build communities on different platforms. And I've found that often when things will work for a period and then they'll just die because the context changed, or they'll work for one group and then mysteriously not work for another group. It's very odd. Which is why I don't think that design is ideally just who. It's also who and when and the context, right? Did anything else come up? Thank you so much, Chief, for joining us. I don't know if she's still here. Yeah, she is.
Daniel, it's Ward. I at least have something that came out in the small group, which I think Bill DeMarco deserves credit on this one. And I like what he said, because his saying was, there's a place for bureaucracy because it's a dance between chaos and order. And I like the very concept of it, because, yeah, you got to have some of it, because if not, people will do whatever they want to, and it won't necessarily be to benefit everyone, or it'll be to benefit a small group. So I like what he said. I just wanted to bring that up because I thought it was a good quote.
The interesting implicit thing there is a bureaucracy serving the people within the organization that they're in, which I've had mixed experiences in. So not to say that Bill DeMarco is wrong at all, just pointing out sort of the double-edged nature of that sort of thing, wherein bureaucracies, if they are to serve the people, might not always serve the people that we need them to serve.
Oh, very true. Or it will serve specific groups, not necessarily our group, or, a group that we want, perhaps. Can't say
Correct.
that. I'm with you. And one of the things that I have to ask, I'm going to pull the thread on this one, because it was the person who was talking about the bureaucracy, and you have to go to the highest level, and who can make a decision. I totally agree with that. But the problem is, at the end of the day, the buck should stop at the supervisor, but that never happens. Somebody, if they don't want to make the decision, they kick it up the chain. And so where does it really stop? If you go to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, then you could go, and not like their answer, you can go to the head of, DOD, and then, president, essentially. But how many people are really going to take it that far? So I applaud WIT for all that they've done. I think it's marvelous.
Yeah,
but
it's fun.
Where do you stop? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a funny story about, it's not a funny story, it's a horrible story about overcoming bureaucracy, which is this EFMP, this exceptional family member program issue that I was having, where I struggled with my immediate leadership. They felt kind of powerless in the face of these policies, which I thought it could be argued was reasonable. But I ended up going to these Pentagon open meetings. Apparently there are these interest groups, they're like policy groups that hold open public meetings in the Pentagon. And I was like, it's public, I can go. So I just showed up, and they were talking about EFMP policy at the DOD level, like DOD instructions and what the DOD instructions should look like. And I bumped into the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force at one of these. And I told, and my issue ended up getting solved for relational reasons, because I just got into the habit of kind of pestering them. And then when they pester my leadership, it sounds like it's like an alarm. It's like a very red flag, which probably didn't, do me favors with my immediate leadership. But yeah, it was Chief Cody. Credit to Chief Cody. He did some things. He helped me. It was more Chief Wright that helped me, but yeah.
I wanted to tell a story about my most favorite supervisor, because it is relevant here. And I've never told this story before, so bear with me. I'm not an improv storyteller kind of person, but we'll do my best here. So I was just coming off a completely horrible time in Korea, wherein I had ideas and plans to execute those ideas, and was completely chopped down by leadership there. coincidentally, some of those people have now become my friends. So there's an interesting story to tell there at some point. But my favorite supervisor was coming off of that, and I already had a negative experience of what that's, what it's like to have ideas and solutions and ways to approach that. My favorite supervisor, I pitched him a problem, and instead of saying yes or no, he told me in these words, I can't approve that. So I'm going to point you to the next person in the line who can tell you yes or no. I'm going to point you to the person who can say yes or no. And that made a fantastic difference. So if you're in a position of supervising at all, I would recommend this mindset. Because at the end of the day, your job isn't to say no, unless it is explicitly to say no. But there's a lot of contexts where it's obviously not the case that to shoot down ideas. And I think the WIT experience speaks to that. And there's a lot of people who are saying no who had no authority to say no over that project. And so one of my favorite supervisors embodied that idea of like, I can't approve or disapprove of this. So I'm going to point you to the people who can.
That's amazing.
It was Hodgson.
Oh, Hodgdon's amazing. We love Hodgson.
Something I wanted to add as well that I thought that I think that in general, some of our conversations when it comes to just how we do things and some of the policies and procedures within the Air Force, there's a key thing that I feel like isn't talked about enough, and that's intersectionality, right? So intersectionality is freaking key. It is, I'm not just this one thing, I'm these other things too. So, as Major Nadeem, I like using her example because I feel like it's well known, but the hair policy, right? Guys, you're like, okay, rock on, good job. You guys can rock the hair, free the bun, awesome. Part of it, is okay, cool, that's awesome, but it doesn't quite apply to me. But then people try to find a way to make it apply, as in, hey, what about beards, right? There's a whole initiative around this. And guess what? They're using the framework that WIT used for Free the Bun to put this proposal together for beards, right? The other thing too, we talked about pregnancy. I mean, I'm a service member and a parent. So, those are things that we have to look at. And sometimes I feel that bureaucracies in general do not take intersectionality of humans into account, if that makes sense. So I think as leaders, doesn't matter what level we lead at, that anybody can be a leader, anybody can empower others. Having a lens of intersectionality, so maybe not quite seeing it as, oh, well, you're a service member, you signed that dotted line. Let's take a look at, okay, the human-centered approach. Yes, but this person is struggling with this, or this person has this issue. Let's really look at it. And then what I also think is me personally, is the research that backs everything, the data that backs everything. Once we really start asking ourselves those hard questions, my second thought always is, I wonder how many other people this has happened to. One of the issues that I'm currently working on right now, one of the WIT LOEs, is family care plans. Okay, so we talked about EFMP, family care plans is a huge passion of mine because I hate the program so much, and I'm a first sergeant. I'm supposedly the person that is supposed to help people with family care plans and put them in order, but I absolutely 100% despise the line, well, where's your family care plan? So because of that, I'm working on this LOE to find a way to make it better, because as a person that has needed the family care plan for the last 14, 15 years, that's how old my youngest ones are, or my oldest ones are, excuse me. As time has progressed over those last 15 years, my life has gotten actually more and more complicated from getting divorced and remarried. My ex is an active duty service member. My current spouse, who hopefully is still in this group, love you, babe, is also a service member. I'm a traditional reservist that travels to my duty station. Oh, he is here. Hey. So, you know, that is one of those things that it complicates it, you know, and family care plans weren't designed for my intersectionality. And so that's something that I think is a topic and an idea and a lens that we need to use more often, especially within our processes.
Yeah, just to tie before I go hand it over to Nicole, just to tie it into my very abstract talk, I think that intersectionality provides a really excellent way of understanding the complexity, like the non-standardization piece. Like you create these policies for a standardized kind of idea, but intersectionality kind of points out all of the ways in which, even like, you can't even standardize the ways in which my, you know, like somebody's blackness or their, you know, their sexuality or their gender or like their, like all of these aspects, you can't standardize how those will present because they intersect with other complex aspects of their lives, which makes everybody very individual, which means that the only way to standardize is to standardize via intent. You can standardize intent. That's in it, like I can say the intent of the family care policy is to have this particular outcome. This is what mission command is about, right? It is to have this particular outcome. And I know for a fact that the first sergeants who wielded family care plans against me, they were not like trying to embody that intent. That it felt very much like a bludgeon being used against my family because they wanted me to fulfill the needs of their system, right? All right, sorry, Nicole, go ahead. I just got triggered.
No worries. So it comes back to, and some of it's bureaucracy and some of it is just the fact that we live in an institution that was created during the industrial age. Most of our rules, policies, all of those things are artifacts of a time where societally we were not as complex as we are now. Things have changed so dynamically over the last 30, 40 years where we expect new things. And oh, by the way, our children are also going to expect different things, right? And the things that help us look at and attract and retain talent we're going to have to take a more individualized approach as opposed to what we've done in the past, which is a very policy-based, rules-based approach, right? And so as we move towards the future, if we're going to win the war on talent, by the way, we're going to have to recognize that every airman is an individual. They bring different talents, skill sets. They want to learn different things. They come from different experiences. If we really are truly embodying diversity and inclusion, we accept that all of those things are what goes into making an airman the right airman at the right time for the right job, right? And so even our industrial age personnel processes, the way that we push people through the pipe from a training and education perspective, we assign a 5-digit badge of honor, and they sometimes keep that same, you know, one-trick pony mentality for their entire career. And we have to recognize that in the future, our airmen are cognitively able to do more than one thing. They have complex lives. They have choices. By the way, the next generation values choice. And so if we create an institution that is rigid and inflexible in today's day and age, with everything that has happened societally in our country and around the world, and even just simple things like health, right? 30 years ago, you didn't have ADHD medication proliferated through your schools because your kids, you know, stood up out of their chair. And now, you know, over the last 20 years, teachers have just been pushing it. And so what do you do now with an entire society of children that have either been not necessarily, you know, they've been medicated or they've pushed some other type of behavior modification on them? You know, we have to figure out how to recognize that society has just changed. Our values have changed, and we have to go and figure out how to retool an agile enterprise which by the way means you can't have a bureaucracy. It can't take me 5 years to change a rule on hair policy. It just can't. It can't take me 5 years to make a 7 level anymore. You can't afford it, especially if you're going into great power competition or peer conflict, which is, you know, is definitely a possibility. So that's just my 2 cents from sitting in the seat that I'm sitting in right now. It is very frustrating though.
That's a really common just experience of being at high levels that I've seen I think a lot of people at the ground level have this vision of people sitting in the Pentagon, like cackling maniacally, like, haha, we got them with the bureaucracy. Aha, keep them down. When in actuality, people in those seats are super frustrated by how restricted they feel like and are by this system, which means that the operating system, that's what indicates to me that it's not the people. It's, you know, there's a whole structural problem here.
I mean, I tend to tell people when they push back on me with that's in the AFI, that if it's not in the law, it means that I can change it. The AFI is written by us. We control that, and we have the ability to change it. You just have to be willing to. It's similar with things like TMT. I don't feel a need to push every task in TMT. And in fact, I refuse to in most cases. And it's uncomfortable, but eventually will hopefully get us to where we need to be, which is people making decisions at the lowest competent level in order to, one, know how to critically think and assess risk and realize when they need to push something up. And then we get to speed and we get to productivity and we get to something that's a better outcome.
I like that you mentioned TMT, because I think that the whole system of taskers is built, like if I were to like mine down to what the mental models are that support that behavior, I think we fundamentally don't trust each other. Like we don't actually believe that if we send something out, that we're going to get a response. And maybe in a lot of cases that's reasonable because people are overtasked, but it speaks to a much more significant like cultural issue that if I don't have something that I can hit you with after you don't, you know, like meet my need, then you just don't ask for things, which seems crazy to me. The whole idea of, I have the same feelings about staff like routing things to the commander. I'm like, but why can't I just, like, I talk to him all the time or her all the time. Can I just be like, hey, can you sign this really quick? No, I have to get my supervisor and the first sergeant and the superintendent and all these people who don't care what I have to share with the commander to say yes or no and maybe nitpick my spelling, right? Which is, yeah, I think that there's some cultural issues here as well.
It's a gross misuse of tax dollars as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Fiscal constrained environment. But I will tell you that, you know, there is definitely progress that hopefully we are making to change that culture. And certainly our strategic assessments team is actually got a line of effort where for the next year with some folks through IDA, we're going to study trust. Because from the framework of being able to assess the operating environment against red, if we say that empowerment is our strategic advantage, we have to examine trust from a trust people, trust from a trust systems, trust from a trust, war fighting, et cetera. And so just really looking across that spectrum and how does trust affect our ability to push things like mission command down to the lowest competent level. And that's, I think it's long overdue. And I'm actually really optimistic about being able to take a look at it.
Excellent. All right, Chris, we're going to have to wrap up here pretty quick.
Daniel, I've been, since we both went through the Warfighter Center design course last year, yeah. I've been actively like pushing that kind of thinking because I like what Naval X is doing where they're just like, it's like barrage training as many young Marines and sailors as they possibly can. So they have like this insurgent army of people that think differently about thinking. And you trigger me with the commander's signature thing because we had some policy folks saying, you know, this has to be wet signed by the commander. And I was like, well, hold on. You need a signed letter, an appointment letter. And they're like, yes, you need an appointment letter for the person signed by the commander. I'm like, cool. Commanders digitally sign stuff all the time. We write one letter with all those people on them saying these people appointed to these things, 50 names, one digital signature, America, we're done. We can post it to the website. You get a copy of it anytime you want, 24/7. And they just kind of like lean back like, but, and it's, I think that's that power thing, but you took away my you took away my whoopee that I was going to force you to get time with the commander, who really doesn't have time for any of that. And then we start going, oh, and by the way, the commander's delegated person for that is actually that flight commander over there, who's a commander, and they take care of it. So there's your signature, there's your letter. I think those little victories over time could potentially, from within, kind of, I'll over glorify it, say cultural revolution, but it might help us little by little try to turn the Titanic. And I'll stop talking.
I agree. No, I'm glad that you brought up those organizations that are trying to do grassroots stuff, because, you know, that's near and dear to my heart. The whole idea of just giving people a space. Maybe it's official, maybe it's not. In the case of Agitare, it's just like we're trying to empower people with those mindsets and those practices that will actually equip them, because challenging everything, it can be kind of tricky, right? So having tools to do so can be is I think useful, in addition to giving them the mindset. Then you go, oh, but here are the tools to do that safely in a way that's not going to ruin your time. All right, I'm gonna have to call it. I'm sorry. Is there anything that anybody feels like really, Stephanie? I feel like you unmuted. I don't want to cut you off there.
Sorry, I had it and then I lost it and I got it back real quick. So as a leader, as one of those leaders that is in a position to lead, okay, doesn't mean doesn't make me a great one, but one thing that I've always found is letting your folks know, and being on the other end doing this, is to, if you see a problem, bring it up as a problem and come with something of a solution, because sometimes as the leaders, we may not see the problem. So just bringing it to our attention can actually start the ball to roll. So just make sure, if you can, if you're not sure, talk to other friends, talk to folks, talk to peers, talk to supervisors, leaders, shirts, commanders. Hey, do you know that this is a thing? And sometimes we just don't know. And when it's brought to our attention, then we can really go, oh, dang, okay, let's start asking all these questions and get to the bottom of it. And is there a way to make it better? So just make sure you share. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And that's it.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thank you, Gerald. Thank you, Austin, who's not here anymore. Thank you, Alea, for that incredible talk about the Women's Initiatives team. I'm so excited that everybody decided to join us, and all of you decided to stay for an extra 21 minutes overtime, which is crazy because it was an hour-and-a-half event, but it makes me feel good. I could talk about this stuff all day, but I should probably go help with dinner. I thank you seriously so much. In that survey, which I put in the chat, there's an opportunity to provide your email address if you're interested in attending future events like this. And please be brutal and honest with your feedback so that we can, you know, if we do future ones, we can do it even better. And that is the show.